Okay, I'd like to call the Comox Valley Regional District Board meeting of Tuesday, November 22nd, 2022 to order. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And part of our commitment to reconciliation is to educate ourselves. One of the ways we did this with the previous board is to familiarize ourselves with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. And I would like to continue this practice with our new board. So today we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada call to action number 13, language and culture. We call upon the federal government to acknowledge that Aboriginal rights include Aboriginal language rights. And with that, we move to our in-camera motion. Harbour and McCullum, thank you. And that's according to 91A of the Community Charter. All in favor? That's carried, thank you. And that takes us to reports. We have board orientation today, roles and responsibilities, and that is with Alison Habkirk. We welcome her back. Harbour and McCullum, thank you. And again, welcome, Alison.
Great, thanks so much, Madam Chair. Russell, is there anything that you wanted to say before I start?
No, other than to welcome you. And I think Jake might have a few comments just on procedures as this is an open meeting and such, and how the board's options might be available to them. Jake.
Okay. Thank you, Russell, through the chair. Yeah, just cognizant board members that certainly Alison is here to provide a presentation on roles and responsibilities. This is going to cover, I think, a broad, large number of topics central to your role in functioning as regional directors. This is an open public meeting that's being live cast right now, but of course, there is the ability, should there be topics or discussions that are of a sensitive nature that you wish to have in closed session, we can consider whether the board wishes to enter into that closed session to discuss those matters and then come back out and continue the presentation. So just want to make that known to the directors. And again, it does need to be in compliance with the community charter and the sections that allow for closed sessions, but do want to make sure that that is understood and an option for the board should you wish to make use of it.
Great, thanks, Jake. All right, over to you.
Okay, thanks so much. This is a weird sounding microphone. Thank you, Jake, for giving me a warning because I feel like there's this sort of big echo. And of course, those of you who know me know there's just nothing worse than trapping me behind a lectern. Like it's just, I'm kind of a roamer. So I'll do my best to be well behaved behind this and stay in front of the microphone. Let me first say congratulations. Like awesome. You survived the election, right? And here you are at the beginning of a new term. And really what a great time this is. You have 4 years ahead of you. You don't have to worry about an election for another 4 years. And you can think about all of your aspirations for the term and all the things that you can do together leading this. And this is, I'm not just blowing smoke here. I mean, this is a great organization and you do great work. And so, yeah, congratulations to you. And I wish you all the best for a really productive, successful term of office. Isn't that what we all hope for when we get elected? Just for the newcomers around the group, if I could just say a couple of things about myself. I'm a recovering elected official. I spent 3 terms on my hometown of District of Central Saanich on the council. The last term was mayor. I'm a professional planner by training, and I am still a registered planner and still sort of carry on doing that work. And I spend a lot of time teaching staff, involved in these kinds of workshops with councils and boards, and I just really feel like I have the best job in the world, and I'm very lucky. So, and I'm really happy to be back in the Comox Valley because I think over the last 5 or 6 years I've had the great fortune to do all kinds of interesting things up here and to work with your organization and some of the municipalities in the region, and it's just a great place to work, and I'm sure it's a great place to live. So lucky you. So today, I was asked to talk about roles and responsibilities. And, I thought this is a very special group because there are a couple of new members, but you're mostly returning members. And so you probably don't want to spend a huge amount of time on the real basic fundamentals things. So I thought I would try to do a little bit about the fundamentals and a lot about other things. And I really thought we'd focus on relationship building and getting things done. How do you actually get the things done that you want to do? So I acknowledge that this is your meeting and we'll go wherever you want to go. So if at some point you want to take it off in another direction, let's talk about that and we'll see what we can do. So the first part of my presentation is about some of the very, very basic fundamentals. And for those who are newcomers especially, don't be shy. We should just speak up and ask the questions that you need answered. I wanted to start with a couple of questions of you, first of all. If you think forward to 4 years from now, at the end of your term, what do you hope your citizens will say about the sport? How would you hope that they'll describe the sport? Dr. Hillian?
Well, I would hope that it's described somewhat similar to how it was described last time. How it was described by me last time was that there was an unprecedented level of cooperation and working together among the different elements of governance in the Comox Valley, including the First Nation. And despite enduring a global pandemic, a tremendous amount positive was accomplished, including major progress on long-standing issues that needed resolution in our communities. So, pardon me because I got a caramel in my mouth.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dr. Hillian. Others? Dr. Arbor?
Thanks. Since learning the results of the election, I've been wondering if how this board eventually will address our kind of framing of our work. And we've had the 4 drivers the last term, which I think really helped in myself when I talked to the public around what the shared priorities were. And I don't know if they'll be the same. Those 4 drivers kind of managed to hold through the pandemic in the sense that we didn't get really distracted from those core values. And but without the pandemic, I'm hoping if we keep similar orientation, and that's to be determined, but if we do keep a similar orientation, hoping we can do an awful lot more. And I'd like to be remembered both as the fiscal responsibility. We've got probably challenging budget ahead right off the bat. There's a lot of inflation around, so I'd love us to be role models in terms of best addressing the various pressures that are on society right now through good budget management, but also really turn the dial up on the other drivers and see what we can achieve without having to worry about hopefully a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Others? What would you like your citizens to say about this board? Yeah, Dr. Kirk.
I think to me, citizen engagement is a really important core principle. And I think if people living in the Comox Valley said, the CVRD board, the CVRD in general, they were approachable, they listened. I see my ideas, my values, my thoughts reflected in their work. That would be a real positive. We saw such a low voter turnout here and across BC and across Canada in municipal elections. And I think, there's many drivers for that, but certainly more engagement, more citizen involvement would be a real success 4 years from now, and might even lead to more people saying, yeah, I'm going to go vote in the polls. I'm going to go vote in the election because like, my opinion matters and my vote matters.
Thanks. Director McCollum?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been shared already. But the other thing I hope that people will see from the decisions that come out of this board and over the next 4 years is a commitment to long-term thinking rather than short-term wins. The long-term decisions are sometimes the harder ones to make, but they're really where we should be focused in local government.
Okay, let me ask one other question. What do you expect of each other at the board table? Director Cole-Hamilton?
Sure. I think courtesy and respect to challenge each other's views and to seek to collaborate wherever possible to find common ground.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just kind of going back to your last question, I think Director Kerr kind of said it, but a very responsive board and highly functional board. And I think, there is a low voter turnout for municipal election or local government elections. And, I think people have a lot of challenges in their daily lives and don't necessarily have the bandwidth to always think about what is happening in local government. So hopefully people say that, that they have trust and faith in their local governments, that we are making those hard decisions and doing, aligning with the community values and doing the best we can. And so that they don't have to worry so much about local government. They see it being really functional and not having, bickering and all that stuff and having to add to the daily worries of our average citizen with what's happening at our table.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Anybody else want to respond to either question? But yeah, Director Hillian? I'm
just wondering if Director Hardy being on the phone, we might give him the opportunity. It's harder when you're on the phone to jump in, I sometimes find.
Yeah, thanks. Director Harding, not to put you on a spot.
I'm good right now, thanks.
Okay. Anybody else about what you expect of each other? Courtesy, respect, collaboration, anything else? Director Kerr?
As a newcomer, I'd really like to make some friendships and have some fun and, get to know people. I think decisions are made better by groups of people that enjoy working with each other and communicating, and even when disagreements arise, respecting the person and having that relationship, really allows for, constructive, discussion, and you can all, be collegial afterwards as well. So yeah, hoping to make some friends.
Yeah, good. Anybody else? I think that's a great start. And I just encourage you to ponder those two questions, particularly early on in the term of office, and think about what you hope your citizens will say about you at the end of this term, and what you hope for each other over the next 4 years, because Director Kerr, you're going to spend a lot of time with these people. And I hope for you that you develop some friendships and that you like each other at the end. Doesn't always happen, but yeah, I think you're probably right. It makes the work easier. Let's see if we can get this thing to work. Okay, Jake, you told me this was working. I'll point it at you. All the best planning. Not only have you trapped me behind the podium. Thank you. This is one of the themes of the time we're going to spend together today, because I think if I reflect back on my time in local government, which is way longer than I'm going to attach a number to, this is my takeaway. It's that it's all about relationships. It's all about the relationships that you have with each other. It's all about the relationships you have with the staff, the relationships you have with the citizens, and the relationships between the member jurisdictions, the municipalities, and the regional district. That really, at the end of the day, it all comes down to this. And I think this is this is my point of view, even more true than it was 20 years ago. The days of slash and burn, throwing chairs at each other are gone in local government. And don't laugh, it's happened. And, just south of here, it happened, right? And that the kind of relationships you establish are just such an important ingredient in your success and what you're able to accomplish. So that this is one of the themes today. And then we're going to go to the boring stuff. So where do you get your authority from? Starts with the Constitution Act, Division of Powers, Section 92, local governments given to the provinces to have essentially sole authority over, and you get your powers from the province through the Community Charter and the Local Government Act. Local Government Act being the significant act that provides for your powers, the powers for regional districts. And then there's lots of reference to the Community Charter too. We have two acts in BC. Why? Because the reform of the NDP government and the Gordon Campbell government created the Community Charter, and they didn't keep going to reform the Local Government Act. We still have these two acts. Every other province in Canada has one act. We have two. We're special here. But that's where your authority comes from. And your authority comes from the member jurisdictions. Your actual powers come from the federation of the member jurisdictions. So just, and I know for those of you who've been around for a while, this is all old stuff, but what do regional districts do? They provide services. They enable jurisdictions to work together. This is one of the founding motivations for the creation of regional districts in BC, was to create a mechanism that would allow jurisdictions to partner on services and to share services. They are, of course, general government for the electoral areas, and as our electoral area directors know, and then there's an administrative function, particularly with respect to borrowing. This is partly my editorial comment. I'm a champion of regional districts in BC. I think it's a fantastic system. It's unique in North America, but there are many good things, many good characteristics of regional districts. They're locally controlled. You're all elected locally by your member jurisdictions. Super flexible. Like incredibly flexible. That's part of the criticism too. People just can't get their heads around how complex regional districts are and how many services you provide and the different combinations and permutations of services, but incredibly flexible. And they're multi-purpose. You do all these different things on behalf of your member jurisdictions. So really, really interesting structure. And, the experts would say this has served British Columbia very well, despite the criticism that you so often hear. And I think a lot of misunderstanding, particularly on the part of the media and the public, that, it's a super complex system and they just can't quite get their heads around it. Some of the benefits of sharing services, you can do together what you can't do alone. That's really in large part why you're at the table, because many of you on your own couldn't produce a liquid waste management plant or a water supply. It's just beyond your capacity. You've got particularly these large capital intensive services that you gain an economy of scale by having a bunch of jurisdictions sharing the costs. You're fulfilling regional ambitions. This is maybe especially true in a place like the Comox Valley, where you have these three small, relatively small municipalities and, unincorporated areas, but you're all very close together, right? And you all affect each other. So you have regional interests, you have shared interests, and you have concerns about what the others are doing. There's broad, region-wide benefit, public benefit. Collaborating allows you to provide a better service, a higher quality service, or more of it, or a level of service that you wouldn't be able to afford on your own. And that the benefits extend beyond one jurisdiction. So you're able to, again, spread the benefit across the region. So lots of, really good benefits from this structure that you're a part of. I just wanted to note that, of course, the mandatory required mandated services are very few. Almost all of the services you provide are voluntary, that you got into them voluntarily or chose not to get into them. So, mandatory service, general administration, 911 service, solid waste management, electoral area planning, regional hospital district, right? Everything else is voluntary. You, somewhere along the way, the people before you, the elected officials before you, opted to get into a service. And I should say, it's not too difficult to get into a service, but as you know, it can be quite difficult to get out of it. So, you want to be aware of that as you're getting in, but almost all of the services are voluntary services. And you've had some interesting experiences recently around people, services being restructured and some people not being part of it and others being a part of it. In my view, every board's a new board, even if you have just one new member on your board. And I think you have 2 new members on your board, right? 2 new members on your board. The whole complexion, it's my experience that the whole complexion, the culture of the board may very well change. And so you need to give yourselves times to adjust to the new relationships that are going to be built and the new input that you're going to get. On the first council that I was a part of, second council I was a part of, we had just council 7. One member changed. It changed the whole dynamic of the council. It was remarkable, and I would not have known that. So you just have to give yourself time. You have to think of it as a new beginning, a new start, and really kind of ramp up for the time ahead. Oops. Sorry if I can just see. Okay, it's not going to go backwards. I just want to acknowledge the vastness of the area that the regional district is responsible for. I mean, it's huge and quite diverse. So you have intense urban areas and a lot big areas of hinterland, let's call them. So a really, really large and diverse region. 3 electoral areas, 3 municipalities. I'm going to have a hard time reading this. This is from your, I want to say your annual, it's from your corporate plan. I'm sorry, that's what it is. And, there's some really super fantastic information in that report that if you want to get a good look at in a capsule moment, what the regional district does, that's a great place to go. And I think I have, I know what those bubbles refer to how many services are delivered in each of the jurisdictions that are part of the federation. So you can see that all 3 municipalities, all 3 electoral areas receive a real vast array of services. So area C, I think that says 48, I can't read from here, 48 different services, right? 49, thank you. So clearly, one would hope that these are really vital services being provided to your citizens through the mechanism of the regional district. So what's your role? And I'm going to take you to, whoops. Oh, God, this is going to drive me crazy. Hang on. Let's just go back here. What's your role? First of all, the board is the governing body. You have the authority. You hold all the authority. You're the decision makers. Everything really rests on your shoulders, and it's a continuing body. It will continue from the last board to this board. And, we like to throw this word governance around. So I just wanted to talk about this for a little bit. The community charter refers to delivering good governance. And so what does that really mean? What does that look like in the real world? So I see sort of 4 key areas of responsibility. First of all, setting the strategic direction. So figuring out what your priorities are, setting the strategic direction for the term. That clearly is a big part of your responsibility. Second responsibility, allocating resources. So all the budget that you referred to, all of the decisions you'll make about allocating the human resources and the financial resources of the corporation. You have an oversight and reporting role. You have oversight of the CAO, which you do through some kind of feedback back to the CAO, and then reporting out to your citizens through an annual report or your financial statements each year. And then you have a responsibility to manage risk. And there's 2 parts to that in my mind. Part is managing your assets and managing the legal risks to the corporation. 4 big areas of responsibility for the board. Oh. Come on. You can do this. There we go. Can you just go back to the good governance one, Jake? One more back. So, again, the community charter makes reference to good governance. And what does that mean? This is adapted from the UN view of what good governance means. And here are the key characteristics of good governance. Transparency. So your governance should be transparent. People should be able to see what you're doing. They should be able to see your decision-making, the evidence and the information you use to make decisions. That should all be visible to the public. You should be accountable for your decisions. And, you are at the very least at election time, but throughout the course of the term, you should hear what people have to say about what you're doing. You should follow the rule of law. Just imagine that, following the rule of law. So everything you do should be legal. You should be responsive to your constituents. The work that you do should be equitable and inclusive. So you should be sensitive to that. Good governance should be consensus oriented. So you should seek consensus. And I have been interested to see that in things like your liquid waste management committees, consensus is the goal. It's actually stated in the terms of reference. I don't see that very often, but I think that's very interesting that this regional district seeks to find consensus. And of course, consensus decisions are super strong decisions, right? If you have real divided majorities, then I always think of those decisions as being less strong. If you seek consensus and come to compromise, then you're going to have very strong decisions. And good governance is effective and efficient. So I would hope that those are in your mind as your objectives for your term of office, that you want to deliver good governance to your citizens. And those are the kinds of characteristics you're seeking. Want to go to the next one, Jake? I'm going to defer to you. Key decisions of the areas of the board. So where does the board play a really critical role in decision making? So of course, in governance, your code of conduct, which you're going to talk about later today. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but you're going to talk about it more. And your meeting procedure bylaw, how you do your work, how you organize that. So those governance decision areas. Of course, you have complete responsibility for appointing the CAO and offering feedback to him. You have complete authority over corporate strategic planning, so setting a path for the next 4 years. You have decisions to be made around organizational performance, to, gather good information and to make sure that you're performing in the way your citizens hope you will perform. Financial planning, asset management, tax rates, or fees for your services. All of those are your part of your decision making, and you'll have decisions to be made around policies, bylaws, planning. Your RGS, all of those things are your responsibilities. Corporate communication and reporting, of course, you play a key role there. And then in your external relations with other agencies, other levels of governance, your First Nations. So those would be the key areas where you'll be spending time making decisions. Next, Jim. And you have a couple of different mechanisms to use. Some of the decisions you make will be made by way of a bylaw. So your financial plans and your meeting procedure bylaws, those are done by bylaw. You'll make simple resolutions, or just simple majority resolutions of the board. And then you'll have policies that are, used for ongoing matters and established policies of the board. And again, I was into your website in the last couple of days, and you have a whole section on board policies. So they're all there in one place, easy to get to. Next, Jay. And then in terms of directors' responsibilities, this comes out of one of your policies, board roles and responsibilities. It's on your website. And I'm not going to go through this in any kind of detail. There's way too many words on the page here, but I just wanted to actually capture the actual wording of the policy. So what does your policy say your role is and your responsibilities are? So to consider well-being and interests of the regional district board and communities, contribute to the development of decisions and policies, of course, to participate in board meetings, to participate in adopting bylaws and policies, assist in developing and adopting the board strategic plan, and representing the regional district and various other bodies. Go to the next one, Jeff. Jay. You should be well informed. You have a role to play in assisting in the orientation of new board members, helping them come into the fold. You should actively participate in the board meetings and in the effective action and leadership on the board meetings. It's not just the chair's responsibility, but everybody has a part to play in that. You should work in partnership and collaboration with the board and the CAO. Should actively participate and assume leadership roles in committees, commissions, and hearings. You should examine issues, turn your mind to the work at hand. You'll have to balance the competing interests between electoral, municipal, regional areas and decision-making process. So there obviously are competing interests. I mean, that's kind of your world. There's no easy answers to the work that you do, which is part of what makes it so difficult. And you should be familiar with and provide governance of new and existing policies in collaboration with the board. So these are all nicely articulated in this policy if you want to go and spend some time looking at that and sort of reflecting on your ability to live up to these expectations. Next. I just wanted to touch on the roles. You have two different kind of hats at the table. You have the municipal director's role and the electoral area director's role. And they're worded again in your roles document in the same way. So the municipal director has a dual role to represent the interests of the municipality, balanced with the obligation to make decisions in the best interests of the region as a whole. And this is maybe perhaps the most difficult part of your job, is balancing those two interests. You have responsibilities to your municipality, and as a member of the board, you have a responsibility to the region as a whole. So sort of, wrestling with those. In the next one, Jake. And the electoral director has exactly the same role, a dual role to represent the interests of his or her area and balance that with the obligation to make decisions in the best interests of the region as a whole. And I suspect that each of you will wrestle with that in a slightly different way. Dr. Arter?
I'd add a little thing to the electoral area that is maybe a triple role in the sense that for most issues, we have to vote on the other areas, but we were not elected by those other areas. So whereas the electoral area committee is very much an entity, the reality of the electoral process is that you don't share the same residents. And so that's also another thing between the region and your individual area. You have that responsibility for making decisions well outside your electoral on a regular basis.
And that's a really interesting point. So let me ask you, what is the culture here? What do you use? How do you think of those decisions in other electoral areas?
I think the culture is often unstated. I think the last term, if Dr. Gree would agree, like there's a healthy dose of respect for the person who is representing the main area, but there's also a realization that they can be outvoted. So on some issues, I think Dr. Gree and I, it's maybe one or two cases out of 1,200 or 1,500 decisions that we may have been outvoted by the other areas. But that can become really heavy when there's full public attention on some of those flash issues. You end up getting drawn into things that you did not anticipate when you were on the electoral trail.
Yeah, and I think that's probably just about the right kind of balance, right? And I'll just say, from working in other regional districts, that's not always the case, right? It's not always as respectful, right? So yeah, that was a really good point. Anything anybody else wants to say about that? Any of the Dr. Kurt?
So on the last slide, although it applies to this slide as well, with the dual role, if there is that tension between the regional versus the municipal, which takes preference or precedent? Like, should there be a leaning towards one or the other, or is it truly they're 50-50 and you make the decision based on that?
Jake, do you want to go to the next slide? So what hat does the municipal or electoral area director wear at the CVRD board? So, you're appointed to the board. The municipal directors are appointed to the board by their municipalities. They have a responsibility to their municipalities and to constituents. But you also have a responsibility. You are literally on the board of directors of the corporation of the regional district of the Comox Valley, right? So you have a responsibility to that board. They're not necessarily conflicting interests, but they can be. And one way I would answer your question is to say the health and the success of the regional district affects the health and success of your municipality, and you will have to wrestle with that. And I don't think it's really easy. I just tell you what my own experience when I sat on the regional board in Victoria. When and Lord only knows what your staff are going to say when I say this, because they might just kill me. But when there were really, really contentious decisions to be made at the regional board, I often took them back to my council and asked for their input, because I was painfully aware that if I didn't deliver their will, they would take me off. So I really wanted to be confident that I had their view of things. That's not so helpful in an electoral area setting, but in a municipal setting, I think that having the councils have a very high, at least awareness of the decisions to be made was helpful to me. But there's that's not always going to be easy to strike that balance. Maybe also, if I can say, if you feel really that the regional interests trump the municipal interests, then you're going to have to persuade your fellow councillors and the public that that's the right decision to be made. Any from some of the veterans around the table, any advice you'd like to offer? Yeah, Director Robert.
This came up in a minor way with our latest issue around the regional park service that we created where I was pounding the table a couple times for my electoral area, being very upset about unfairness and all the rest of it. But wearing the regional hat, I still very much voted in favor because I know that all residents of the valley expected something to come out of this. So I think even for municipal directors that we have to realize that for much of the public, they live in the Comox Valley, and we are divided into 6 jurisdictions, but I think that's something that's unique about our area. We're not over 600 kilometers with communities far, far away and really competing, and we share a lot of services and the rest of it. So my experience is I haven't seen the municipal directors last term really lose it over that tension between their municipal duties and the regional duties, but that could be different this term.
Any other pearls of wisdom, Director Hillian?
Yeah, I think it's a reality that people come into elected office with differing perspectives. Some tend to be parochial without having that have a negative connotation. Other people think of the bigger picture in terms of regional interests. And I've seen on previous councils people not get appointed to regional board for that very reason. When experience and merit and an elected office record would have warranted appointment. So, I think we have to bear in mind that this is a political process, and the old adage that you dance with the one who brung you does tend to apply when the rubber hits the road. But the other point I was going to make is that sometimes the longer term interests of the region are actually in the best interest of the individual members without that being apparent based on the present issue, because oftentimes it's about money and how much tax is involved and what are the implications for how much our residents have to pay versus it's a bit like Councillor McCollum's point earlier on about good governance being about making decisions that stand the test of the long term.
Yeah. Sort of helpful. This is your challenge for the next 4 years, to come up with a really good answer to that question. Yeah. Thanks. Jake, next. So what's the staff's role? Next. So we work in what's called the board manager system of government. And this is one where essentially all of the authority is vested in the elected body, which is you. And the staff are hired nonpartisan to give you their professional advice. They're all professionals. You have like a crazy, amazing, well-qualified staff at the CVRD. They're there to bring their best professional advice to you and then to follow your direction and to implement. And this is a system that's essentially universal across British Columbia, across most of Canada. That's not the case in the United States. They have only half of the municipalities in the United States follow this model. But it gives you the benefit of this professional staff while maintaining control over the decision making. It's all concentrated in the elected body. You'll often hear this referred to as the one employee system, where you have one employee, that's Russell, the CAO. He's responsible for all of the operations. You're responsible for hiring him. You give direction to him, and he oversees the operations on your behalf. Next. I'll just tell you what the Local Government Act says about the Chief Administrative Officer. His responsibilities are to provide overall management of the administrative operations of the regional district, to implement your direction, and to advise and inform the board on the operations and affairs of the regional district. So that's what it says. It also has another clause here that says the board's not to interfere with the hinder, not to interfere, hinder, obstruct a regional district officer or employee in the exercise of the performance of his duties. Russell's role is to oversee the operations, and any direction you give goes through the CAO. Next. I was really interested to see this. This is part of the board policy role of the board. I don't always see this, so I was really delighted to see this. Members shall respect and adhere to the board chief administrative officer structure of government as practiced at the Comox Valley Regional District. In this structure, the board determines the policies of the CVRD with the advice, information, analysis provided by the public committees, CVRD staff members. Therefore shall not interfere with the administrative functions of the CVRD or with the professional duties of staff, nor shall they impair the ability of staff to implement the board policy decisions. So you have that translated right into your board policy. Next. And you can see this is translated into your organizational chart, right? So you've got the board of directors at the top, and the connection to the rest of the staff is through the CAO. And then he is responsible for all of the rest of the organization. No pressure, Russell. Next. Any questions about any of that? And I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Sorry. Yes. So
do we just give another moment to, just in case Director Hardy wants to weigh in?
Everything's pretty straightforward.
Good. Thanks, Director Hardy. So it's all about relationships. So about your relationship with the staff. And this is the way I like to characterize your relationship. It's a partnership. You very much need the staff very much need you. And then the public, the third leg on the stool. The board's role is to provide leadership and direction, and the staff's role is to provide you with advice and to implement. And, you don't want to be doing the staff's role, and you don't want the staff doing your role. You don't want the staff making decisions, and you guys don't want to be implementing. If there's a weak link in this partnership, I think it's the public part of it right now. Voter turnout's not great, right? Their level of awareness of what you do probably isn't what you'd like it to be. And they aren't as engaged as they might be. And I think it is, as particularly in this time in history, this is where we need to do more work, to really make sure that part of our partnership to deliver, democracy and services to your region is fulfilled. In a way that I think it's very weak right now. Sorry, Director Urban.
Yeah, thanks. I may contest that a little bit, and maybe we can spend the whole afternoon on that topic. I'm one of the few who doesn't really necessarily equate vote turnout with public interest. If I look at the 5 communities that I represent, I can tell you that the vast majority of residents pay attention to what's happening. Many of them don't vote. On Hornby and Denman, we have 50 or 60% turnout, but I can tell you that 100% of people have a good impression of the services we deliver. So I don't know if that's the same everywhere, but in my communities, I definitely sense that people are paying attention to what the regional district is doing around the different services and delivery. And I think there's some myth busting to always equate voting with public attention.
Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. When you asked earlier what we'd like voters to say 4 years from now, I was half thinking of saying, I'd like them to say, now I know what the CVRD does, because I find that as a municipal director, there's very little, and it's not for lack of interest. Like, I think people find the division of powers between the various levels like challenging. And I think that as a municipal director, having knocked on a fair number of doors, very, very, very few people, I think, appreciate the breadth of the work that's done by the regional district and the importance of it. So yeah, and that's probably just an ongoing challenge of communication.
I would say thanks for those comments. There isn't generally and this is a broad comment, but generally an inverse relationship between the size of a community and the voter turnout. The smaller the community, the higher the voter turnout. The larger the community, the smaller the voter turnout. There is definitely a trend that way. And I think it is easier in smaller places to have that kind of direct contact. I think you have the added complication that you're a regional body that's complicated. You're right. Like everybody doesn't take Section 92 to bed with them. Really? They don't know what Section 92 is. So I think it's just a really important part of what you do and I think you put a lot of effort into this. I just recently read one of your public engagement plans. I mean, it was fantastic. And, a lot of effort and energy goes into informing and engaging the public. And I'm just really here to reinforce that work because I think it's so important. Director Grief?
Yeah, I think if anything needs a rethink, it probably is a public participatory issue. It's, I guess, after the pandemic and everything went Zoom, it was both good and bad in some ways because it did allow people that normally wouldn't participate. But in the same token, and I've said this at this table before, I mean, we take a look at just just like our calls for interest on committees and things like that, we seldom get them filled. People are either oblivious to it or they're just not engaged. I think we need a new model there. It's much like my experience in the nonprofits and volunteerism in the Comox Valley is dwindling. We see again, pardon me if you've heard this before, but we've seen all the service clubs, reduced to a rump. Nobody's doing that volunteer work anymore. It doesn't seem to be part of the culture. The new generation doesn't fit with them. As I say, we go out for calls for participation on some of the committees, and we're still 4 seats short of what we need. And we look around and we see a lot of the same faces coming out again and again. So how do we hear from the quieter voices? How do we go out to the people? I know that some of our engagement might consist of one open house or something. Well, there was a time when we would go out to all the local halls. We'd be at the Cumberland Heritage Center. We'd be up at Union Bay. We'd be in Black Creek, and it's a little more money to do that. And staff have to work on the off hours. But I really think there's got to be some way of supercharging the public to get them involved a little more. I know it's a worldwide phenomenon, so I don't see it changing. But when you absolutely rely on these committees to set policy, it's not inclusive enough. It's not bringing out the other voices. So I do think that's going to be a big challenge in this term, is to re-engage people if they ever were engaged. I mean, I just got out of the dentist's office today, which is why I'm a little bit sedated. But I'm not pounding on the table, Daniel. But I talked about the election, and the assistant goes, "Oh, is there an election coming?"
Yeah.
No, the one we just had. Like,
yeah. Thanks. And there are realities. Yes, there just was a pandemic, and people are mostly two working people in a family, right? I mean, there are incredible pressures. This isn't about, criticism. It's just about addressing the current reality and making sure that our governance system is really, really strong. Director Moore?
Struggling with my voice, but I'll do my best here. Yeah, I think it's really difficult to analyze the reason for low turnout because, and I think the election time is a way that you gauge that if you are out there at events, on doorsteps, because I'm always really surprised. Always, it's only my second election, but I'm surprised by how many people want to engage on the doorstep. Like, so to me, if people are apathetic, they just no, they just want to go back to their life. I'm not interested in politics, but virtually every person who opens the door wants to engage, I find. And some really want to discuss. And and I don't even know if necessarily all of them go and vote, but they appreciate that opportunity to engage. So I think there might be an assumption of apathy that isn't necessarily the case. And I think if you make it easier for people, like showing up at their door, not that we can do that all the time, then people do want to engage and, give their opinions. I also wonder, and I mean, it's easy to say when you've been elected and most of the board is the same, but I also wonder if most people are actually okay with how things are going. And so, we certainly saw during the election a lot of frenzy on social media, but it didn't equate to the dynamic that we were seeing online. It didn't, you got this idea that everyone's upset, but then we know that that's where people go to rant and rave, right? So I just kind of think that we need to find different ways of engaging, because I think people do want to talk, they want to give their ideas, but they just want it to be easy.
Yeah.
Because they've got the toddler pulling on them, and they've got the caring for the aging mother and all these other things. But they want to be heard. So that's my take on it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Chair Kettler?
Yeah, I guess I just want to come to the defense of the next generation that Director Gray was talking about, that don't volunteer anymore. And I think it has a lot to do with, the way that employment has changed. There's not those company jobs where you're working 9 to 5 and then after work you are part of some club and go out and do, volunteer work. I think, most people are, working multiple jobs, lots of gig economy stuff, have lots of demands on them. Both parents obviously working, or you're a single parent with kids, and, just trying to make things work every day. And it's quite a different world, I think, like that. I think a lot of people would love to have the time and the financial ability to be able to volunteer, but that's just not the reality anymore.
Yeah.
I think, the middle class is shrinking a lot, and the gap between rich and poor is getting ever so great. And so, I think that has a lot to do with people's ability to participate and volunteer their time. So I don't know how we can change that. We'll do our best to help local economy, but it's a more global thing, I think. So yeah.
Clearly, this is a topic that is on your minds, and I encourage you on in that. Sorry, Councillor or Director Moore, did you? No, okay, yeah. So I'm sure that this discussion will carry on. Next, Jay. Just some tips for working with the staff. Have a code of conduct, which you have, and again, you're going to talk more about that today. And know your roles, policies around roles, and be aware of that and follow those policies that you have. Of course, your communication from the board to the CAO should always be respectful. Should be clear direction. I want to say this is harder to do than you think. Those motions, those resolutions should be clear. The direction, the more clear the direction is, the easier it will be for your staff to implement. Should be regular feedback, and respect the staff's role. Respect the CAO's authority and responsibility for staff. Treat all the staff with professionals. Expect the best of them, and support them in delivering that professional advice to you. Praise in public, criticize in private. So if you have concerns with a staff member or the CAO, that should always be handled in an in-camera, in a closed meeting of the board. Never done in public, never done on social media. the staff are defenseless in a public meeting. They're not going to take you on. You should always be respectful of that. This should be dealt with in closed meetings. And make sure that you provide adequate resources for what you're asking for. Like, it's one thing to pass a resolution to do something, but it's really important also to pass a resolution to allocate the resources, the staff time, and the money in order, to make it possible for the work to be done. Next. So, all about relationships with each other. First of all, you have a collective voice. You speak as a collective. You only have one voice, right? You come to the board table as individuals. You've all just gone through an election where you're campaigning as individuals, and now you have to make that transition from being individuals to being a collective voice and coming together and giving direction as one voice to your staff. And I think that challenge can be really, or that transition can be really challenging for people, both at the municipal level and at the regional board level. Next. You're structured as a board of directors. You're not structured as a parliament. There's no government in opposition. You come here as independents, 10 independent people, and you collaborate in making decisions. It's quite a different structure than the province or the federal government, right? It is specifically structured as a corporate board coming together as independents. And that is pretty much across the board in BC. There are a few exceptions where parties exist at the local government level, but it's rare. The corporate model, that's the structure, and mostly it's the seats are occupied by independents. Next. You don't need to agree, but you do need to find ways to work together. So acknowledging that you have different opinions, and we'll come to a part of your code of conduct that's very specifically acknowledges this. You come from a pretty diverse region, especially the electoral areas and the 3 municipalities. And I'm here to say that I worked in all 3 municipalities, and they're really different. I find this one of the most fascinating parts of my job. The culture in each of the municipalities is very different, right? You represent different constituencies, and acknowledging that, and in a way, that's sort of the beauty of our system, is that the regional district system has allowed communities to develop their own culture and to continue to exist, really through the ability to share these big capital intensive services. So if you were in Ontario, you would have all been amalgamated, right? But our system allows for the small municipalities to carry on while you share these big services that might have driven amalgamation. And I think the beauty of that is that you have these unique communities. And it's kind of a beautiful thing, I think. So acknowledge those differences and celebrate them, and understand and appreciate that, each of the board members or each of the 6 jurisdictions represented are going to come to these board discussions with a slightly different point of view and probably a different set of priorities. And that's to be expected, and that's okay. You're all equals, though. Your votes are all equal, except for when you have a weighted vote. So that's a whole other thing, right? But you come to the table as equals, debate the issues and wrestle with them, and wrestle hard. As I said earlier, consensus decisions, in my view, are the strongest decisions. And if there isn't consensus, it's about majority rules. That's what we've all agreed to in our system of government. And be brave and gracious if you're not on the prevailing side of the decision. And this is, I think, one of the hardest things to come to. You get into a debate and you wrestle hard and you debate hard, but you're not with the majority, and you have to find ways to yourself live with that and be okay, and to move on. And to acknowledge that was, in the wisdom of the majority of the board, that was the decision to be made. And not to go out and trash the board for making a crappy decision, right? But to say, well, that's the majority ruled, and that's the way our system works. Anybody want to offer a comment on that kind of topic, representing different points of view, what it's like to be on the side that isn't the prevailing side of a decision? Anybody want to offer a pearl of wisdom about that? Dr. Helene?
It's interesting because even though there are some really significant issues where there's major disagreement, we all vote unanimously, probably 95% of the time.
Yeah.
So some of us have had more experience in our political careers being on the wrong side of majority of decisions than others. It's a a bit of a humbling place to be, but I think it's equally important to be gracious if you're in the majority.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Dr. Grief?
Yeah, and further to that, over the 15 years I've been elected, I've seen a bit of a trend one way or the other. So, one term, one group's in the ascendance, the other one over here this way. But I do think it's critical that people enter this chamber with an open mind. And I saw a few occasions in the last term that wasn't so. It was already predetermined. So, I mean, I've seen that going right back to 10 years ago too. But there was at one time kind of an unwritten rule that if you really fought for something, that you really wanted it to happen, and you were turned down at board level, that everybody owed you a beer, and after that you forgot about it.
That's a pretty good rule. Next slide, Jake.
I was just going to say.
Oh, sorry, Chair Kelly.
I think, my experience coming into local government is that it is pretty hierarchical and, colonialist, and not the easiest thing to build trust and, confidence with. And I would like to see, like, and you've mentioned many times, building consensus, but, the model that we have through the Local Government Act isn't necessarily built to support that. And so I would like to see, changes where we can at the local government level work with different models of decision making. And you did mention, that we could do that easier with committees like the Liquid Waste Management Committee. But yeah, I think on a broader scale, it would be nice to move more towards consensus-based decision making.
Yeah, well, at least I'll just go back. At least as a corporate board model, at least you're not saddled with a government and an opposition. I mean, you can make your decisions however you want, and you're not saddled with a party whip or anything like that. So, and if the culture is to have most of your decisions made by consensus, I say good on you. I'll just say from my own experience, on the first council I sat on in particular, we had an agreement. We had two agreements that they weren't written in policy, but it was well understood around the council table that on really, really important decision, we wanted everybody to be present. So if everybody wasn't present, we didn't make the decision. It's, of course, easier to do it at council level than at a board level. We wanted everybody to be there. We wanted their input, and we didn't want anybody to avoid voting by not being there. So we agreed to that. The other thing that we agreed to was that, again, any of those really, really important decisions we wanted them to be consensus decisions. So we just kept going at it until we all agreed. I'll say that first council was the best council I sat on. I mean, those are interesting principles, not always possible, but it makes for, in my view, better decisions in the long run. Councillor Moore? Sorry, Director Moore.
Sorry. Just kind of adding to what Chair Cutler was saying. I think it was during UBCM, I'm pretty sure we had quite a few. We were finally out in the world again, so it's hard to keep track of all these conferences and workshops we were at in the last year. But James actually attended a workshop, the same workshop as me. Excuse me, it was gender equity, but it really talked about, the panel talked about dynamic governance. And to me, this is sort of what I think Chair Kettler is talking about. And I don't know how familiar you are with that, but I would really like to see us explore that kind of model. Really talked about how, we come in similar to what maybe Director Grieve is saying. Sometimes we come in with a pretty set idea. And often that is because of the people who elected us and all kinds of other reasons, right? I don't think people go in just to fight. I think that they come in with good rationale for those positions. And yes, we are going to receive information and perhaps change our mind. But I think that we've been set up to come in with that, let's get, you have that position, I have this position, and you're jockeying. And I know that I kind of get into that by default because that's the way it's always done. But I would love to see us explore some different ways. I know I don't want to put James on the spot, he's not even here, but I think I don't know if, weird. Okay, I didn't even know you were behind me. Okay, so maybe I'm really speaking out of turn, or maybe I'll let if he wants to chime in. But I love the idea of looking at decision making in a different way, because there's nothing that says we have to do it the way that we've been doing it. So thanks.
I'll just quickly speak here. I don't want to take the time from Alison from the board. The workshop you were referring to it spoke about the nature of some of our board meetings and committee meetings where we have a report, we have a resolution or a recommendation to put forward, and it can sometimes be adversarial and arguing for and against that very specific recommendation. And I think there's a space before we get to that point sometimes on some of the topics that could be more collaborative, could be more similar to the workshops we've had with Alison around strategic planning, where it's more of a more dialogue about what are the principles and what are the different approaches that might be available. And then perhaps there's a spot to come back with a staff report that has a recommendation. But before we get to that point, having that dialogue. So I think that was one of the takeaways that I heard from that workshop. And there is certainly opportunity to build that into the governance process, the decision-making process as we go along. We see it in PAC-TAC meetings for the liquid waste management plan, and we see it in some of the strategic planning work we do. So we have some evidence of it, but it's certainly not the regular approach that we take to the decision-making.
Director Erber. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Sorry.
Since you drag staff to the table, I would say that the staff has a role as well, because I think some of the places where it does become more black and white is when the board is presented with only one option, or like an option or do nothing. And I think the boards tend to be much more productive when staff presents 2 or 3 different courses of action. That tends to present for anchoring debate in a better way, because people can weigh the pros and cons. It's more discussion as to what is the best option. So that's just an observation. Personally, every time I'm faced with one option, staff knows that about me, I kind of go cagey, and especially when it's not necessarily an obvious one. So I just point that out. And on the whole, I think staff has done a great job last term of most often than not presenting us with multiple options.
Thanks for that. I'll just say that I was in another regional district recently, and we had a similar discussion, and there was acknowledgement that really local governments, both at the municipal level and regional districts, have really evolved over the last few decades in terms of how they make decisions. And if you just think about a regional district like some of the regional districts in BC, where you have a municipal partner that really dominates that, in my career, I've seen a dominating municipal group come in and just drive decisions forward. That's very rare these days. I think the decision making is much more collaborative, much more respectful. Yes, there's more to be done, but I think we have seen a very healthy evolution of the way regional districts, maybe in particular, conduct their business. Not nearly as aggressive or as combative as I've seen in the past. So that's hopeful, I would say. But yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting thought about how you work together, and really what was on my mind when I put these topics on for discussion today. Director Hillian?
I am really glad that we don't have a domineering municipality.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's perceived that way, but what I was going to say is that the challenge of doing a more dynamic process to arrive at a decision is it would probably take twice as long as what we do now. Yeah. And I actually think part of the reason that people are disaffected from politics is because they don't like sitting through meetings that go on and on and on and on. And generally, when they want to get something done, they kind of want to get it done. And my guess is with the changes that the province is contemplating right now, and the legislative changes that we're going to be seeing, they're not going to be tilted in favor of more democracy and more citizen participation. We just had an example of that last night at our own meeting in this chamber in relation to public hearings, which potentially could be eliminated. And so, we've got this contradiction between wanting to engage people and wanting people to feel like what they think matters, but at the same time wanting to get important things done. And, I could go on and say that's kind of the seeds of authoritarianism as well. So those are some of the dilemmas that I think we wrestle with. The other point I was going to make is that the idea that you were discussing of going with something until you've sorted it out, I think sometimes it's actually good to take a break and get people out of the heat of the debate, because we get into talking just to make our point. And oftentimes, if you pause and come back to it later in the meeting, people have kind of spent their powder and realized that they weren't as attached to that position as maybe they got into during the debate. And you can sometimes arrive at an agreement and by just reallocating the time for the discussion.
Yeah, I just as a follow-up, I'll just say that one of the important things to think about is where you spend your time. So just to your point that this could take lots and lots of time. Well, there might be some decisions that really warrant your time and consensus, and other decisions that you can just make and just plow on. So being strategic about how you use your very precious time and the staff time is really key to being successful, I think. Director Grieve?
I'm going to offer the alternate opinion. What did Mark Twain say about every time I find myself holding the opinion of the majority, I pause and reconsider my position. But no, the opposite has been true too. I mean, one of my heroes, Arjun Singh, when he was chair of UBCM, we were sitting around the table discussing the UBCM convention, and the issue around China's participation came up, whether or not we want them as a sponsor or not. It was back in the day. And that board was quite opposed, and some were for. So there was, and this is when it falls on the chair, and Arjun is very skillful, and his humanity projects, he's a big guy. And he just let everybody talk. He let everybody talk it out. And we were going, well, call a question, No, not going to call a question. I want to hear from you again and you again. And eventually we ended up all in agreement at the decision at the end. But it helped that lunch was waiting in the hall as well.
Thanks. Jake, next one. I just wanted to talk just a little bit about responsible conduct. These are the foundational principles. They're embedded in your code of conduct. They have changed slightly from the original ones. So I don't know if you picked up on that. Did you? Good. Yeah, perfect. Just the wording has changed slightly. Next slide. And I wanted to draw your attention to this course, which is available. I don't know if you're aware of this, but yeah, UBCM, the Working Group on Responsible Conduct, the Ministry, UBCM, and the Local Government Management Association developed this course over the last year, and it's available for all elected officials to help them appreciate what responsible conduct means. So I hope you've all taken it. Has anybody taken it by any chance? Yeah, no, good. Yeah, good. I'd be interested to know your feedback. Yeah, it's online, and you can start and stop. You can go and do a little bit and then come back to it. It should take about an hour to 90 minutes to do something like that. Director Kerr?
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting, and the case studies were, I think, really realistic.
Yeah,
and
that's good to hear.
Both from a regional and a municipal level. So yeah, it's great. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, good. I'm hopeful that it'll be one in a series, but in my last discussion with UBCM, I think they were not prepared to do another one. So we'll see. It was a lot of effort. Next. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of things about your code of conduct, which I thought was great. And you're going to talk about it more later this afternoon. Next slide. I thought the principles you have in your code, which kind of build on the foundational principles, were fantastic: integrity, accountability, leadership, responsibility, respect, openness, and collaboration. So the additions are openness and responsibility. I think those are the additions. I thought that was really interesting. Good on you. And I thought they were articulated really, really well. Next. I just sort of wanted to draw your attention to these parts of your code, most of which are not changing. It's really the latter part that's changing, which I think is terrific that you're going to consider that. So, the commitment, your commitment in this code is to adhere to the key principles, to act within the law, consider issues consistently and fairly, avoid, bad behavior, and you're obliged to question any request to act or make a decision that you think might be unethical or unlawful. So it's your responsibility to speak up if you see things running amok. Next. There are conflict of interest provisions in your code of conduct. Of course, there are the conflict of interest provisions in the community charter, which I think the Local Government Act refers to. You're to be free from undue influence. And you, as an individual director, are to resolve any conflict or incompatibility between your personal interests and impartial performance of your duties. And the responsibility is on you. It's not on the board, it's on you as individuals. So, and this is one of the few provisions which could lead to disqualification. So there aren't a lot of ways you could be disqualified from office, but conflict of interest is one of them. In my time in elected office in my neighboring community, one of the councillors was disqualified from office on the basis of a conflict of interest. So it's very real and alive. And I think British Columbia takes conflict of interest very seriously, and the courts take it very seriously. Next. You're having a legal talk, aren't you? It is in January. So yeah, I'm not a lawyer. I'm always cautious to say that, but you'll certainly hear more about that. There's a whole section about meetings in your code of conduct to recognize the importance of the role of the chair. I would also add to this to support her in the work that she does as the chair of meetings. You're committing to preparing for the meetings, reading your agendas, understanding the issues, respecting the diverse perspectives of the directors around the table. You're called on to consider all the relevant facts, opinions, and analysis. And I just love this clause. Strong disagreements and conflicts will be seen as a natural part of board and committee work. Such disagreements will not be taken personally nor made personal. So just right up front, acknowledging that you will have different opinions and acknowledging that you're going to fight hard for your point of view, but you're going to be able to be adults about it and not take on personal attacks. And I would just suggest neither in the meeting room or on social media. And you're committing to not interrupting, but being civil in your work at the board table. Next. There's also a piece about the use of public resources. So you will not use public resources that are not available to the public in general, such as staff time, equipment, supplies, facilities for personal gain or personal purposes. Next. Communication and media relations. So the regional chair is the spokesperson. All official communications will come through the chair on behalf of the board. You are committing to accurately communicating the decisions of the board, even if they disagree with the majority decision of the board. So I urge you, if you're talking to the media or the public, that you say, this is the decision of the board. You can leave it there, or you could say, this was not, I didn't necessarily support this decision, but that's the decision of the board and that's how we're proceeding. To be very respectful about that. You commit to refraining from making disparaging comments about other directors, the board's decision itself, or the individual staff. And I'll just say back to this, it's all about relationships. Trashing other board members or the decisions of the board won't serve you in the long run and won't help you to build, really good working relationships. And you commit to affirm the respect for and integrity of the decision-making process. So you acknowledge that this is how we make decisions. And even if you're on the dissenting side of things, you're going to be okay with that. Next. Gifts and personal benefits. You shall not accept any money, property, position, or favor of any kind, whether to be received at the present or the future from a person having or seeking to have dealings with the CVRD. And again, there are provisions in the community charter specifically about this. So you have to be very, very careful about that. Next. And yes, here you are. You're required by this new legislation after the election. You have 6 months to consider your code of conduct, to either affirm it, modify it, or to say you don't want to have one. And then that brings with it some other obligations of explaining to the public why you don't. And that's what you're doing this afternoon. So it's exactly the right thing to be doing. Next. Just how to collaborate at the regional board table. Look for things that you can do together that you can't do as individual municipalities. Look for efficiencies and economies of scale. And in particular, I think, remember that you're a federation of municipalities and electoral areas and that most services are voluntary. Look for ways to align individual and shared goals and look for areas of compromise. Next. Diversity is a strength, not a weakness. Next. Just some tips on how to deal with conflicts and differences. I know this sounds a bit Pollyannish, but think of what you would say to your children. What would you want to teach your children about conflict? How would you want to be treated? How would you want them to treat others? A very humanizing thought, I think. Go and talk with the person that you have the conflict with. Sit down, have a cup of coffee, actually have a conversation, try to come to some understanding, even if it's just to agree to disagree. Focus on the issues and not the personalities. Listen carefully, really hear what the other person is saying. Identify points of agreement and disagreement. So seek the areas where you might actually agree on, where you might have, a compromise might be in the making there. Always use a respectful tone. So much conflict is just exacerbated by a terse tone or a condescending tone. So be careful about your tone of voice. Don't get angry and emotional, and learn to bite your tongue. Just if you don't think you can control yourself, just don't say anything. I'll just say Frank Leonard, who probably most of you know, he had a habit that whenever he felt that he was going to lose it, he would write SQ on his piece of paper in front of him, which was to stay quiet. Just was his little way of managing his what he was going to say. And learn to apologize. Learn to say you're sorry. So if you do, misbehave, just, go and apologize afterwards. And have an open mind in which you've talked about yourselves, and be prepared to change it. Next. Just a few things about, and this is the last topic, a few things about your relationships with your member municipalities. Next. Here's my take on this. The best outcomes will result when the CVRD board and staff are working in alignment with member municipalities and staff. And again, I just say, I think this is harder to do than you might think. So really where you want to get to is, and you are in a region where there's a tremendous amount of commonality and not big divisions in ideology or where you want to get to. It seems to me, in reading the official community plans of Courtney, Comox, and Cumberland, and in knowing the board a bit and reading the regional growth strategy, you're all pointed more or less in the same direction. I mean, you're very lucky, because that might not always be the case, right? You just think about a region like the Capital Region, where you got Langford and North Saanich, or Langford and Oak Bay. I mean, these are very, very different places. There's a lot of common aspirations in the Comox Valley. And what will take to really be, successful, I think, is finding ways to align your efforts at the municipal level, of the electoral area, and the regional level. And then I think the magic can really happen. And that means both at the elected official level and at the staff level, getting everybody working together. Next. So how might you achieve this kind of alignment? Of course, your policies need to be aligned, and I think to a great extent that already exists in the things like official community plans and the regional growth strategy, or infrastructure plans at the regional and municipal level. Really good communication between the CVRD and member municipalities. So really helping the municipalities to understand what the region is doing, and for the region to understand what the municipalities are doing. And you only have part of your councils represented at the regional board table. All of the council needs to understand what's happening here, I think. Work supported at the CVRD board also needs to be supported at the municipal level, so that again, the whole council of the three municipalities really understands what's going on at the CVRD, and that resources are available to support your alignment efforts. So that, this sort of alignment isn't just going to happen overnight without some effort, some resources being put into it, time and energy. Having, a good role clarity, understanding what the region's role is, what the municipal's role is, and some element of goodwill, so that there really is a willingness. So often around in regions, you have a them and us kind of attitude. The municipalities and the region, they're territorial or they're oppositional, and I think where you really want to get to is no, we're all in alignment and we're all pointing in the same direction. We have different roles in what it is that we want to do. Next. And just a little bit about getting things done. So understanding the fundamentals about how your government works, how the region works, being strategic, setting priorities, and then staying focused on those priorities. And this, of course, is all about your strategic plan or your corporate plan, in my view. Next. So just a couple of fundamentals, of course, all of your direction comes from the board table. You need to get things on agendas and you need to make decisions and give direction. Next. And you have this various different kinds of votes, simple unweighted corporate vote, weighted votes and stakeholder votes. And that's the purview of your staff. They will guide you in making those decisions and making sure you're making the right kind of decision at the board table. Next. And this is your 2022 corporate plan. Next. And you have a vision statement, which is yours, and you can amend as needed. Next. And then these 4 strategic drivers that you mentioned earlier that have driven the work of the last board, and these will be up for you to consider when you take on strategic planning next. But you just see how important and fundamental those have been in focusing your efforts and resources over the last 4 years. And however you modify or change those or create new ones, they will be so fundamental to your success over the term of office. Next. And you have a set of goals for 2022. Again, this will come forward for you to set a new set of goals or to take these and amend them as you see fit. Next. And then I just, I wanted to add this one because this is a sort of a separate goal in your plan that addresses the long path of reconciliation. Next. And I think one of the great innovations of your last strategic plan is I think you very successfully integrated your core services into your plan. So you have both the core services acknowledge the ongoing work of the regional district, but then you have a set of priorities that sort of layer on top of that. Next. This is just an infographic from your corporate plan. So there's great information there if you want to look at the core, just what are the outcomes from the core services. Next. And then each of the core areas are recognized in your corporate plan, and the little arrow there points to the sort of priorities of the last term, and the upper part of the plan refers to sort of the ongoing core work, which I think was a very successful model in terms of focusing your thinking and efforts. Next. And I just wanted to say that I really encourage you to know your growth strategy and, of course, the official community plans of each of your communities, and just what important, powerful tools they are. And your growth strategy is up for updating or revision or affirmation in this term of office. So a super, super important job for you to be taking on. Next. Just really, this slide is just really about making sure you devote enough time and energy and thinking to setting your priorities, especially at the beginning of the term, because it sort of lays the path for your work for the rest of the term. Next. Maybe I'll just touch on these really quickly. This is based on an article out of the Institute for Local Government out of California. I don't usually go to American sources, but this is a particularly good one. And I'm happy to give you the reference to this article, which is just all about, well, what do exceptional boards look like? What are their characteristics? So just really quickly touch on these things so that you make a successful transition from candidate to a member of the board, that you become a champion for the region, that you develop, communicate, and support policy goals and board decisions, and demonstrate a willingness to work collaboratively as a team and have a region-wide perspective. Next. That you understand your roles and the roles of your member organizations, and strive to be informed about the issues and the work that you're responsible for. Next. That you honor the relationship with staff and with each other. So you really work to build strong relationships with the staff and around the regional board, and that you find ways to respectfully disagree. Next. and that you conduct effective meetings. So, just reflecting on the conversation you had earlier, finding that right balance between spending enough time to make real quality decisions, but not so much time that people tune out or don't want to participate. So really working to find ways that you think this board wants to make its decisions. And, that's totally within your ability to determine that. Next. You hold yourself accountable. So you behave ethically, you set goals, you report out, you take responsibility for your decisions. Next. And you think of this job as a learning job, which those of you who sat around the table already for a while, that. I mean, there's just so much learning that you need to do to be on top of the issues and to be able to make good decisions. Next. And communicate back to your municipal councils and staff. Again, I think the information needs to flow from the regional district to your municipalities, ensuring that adequate resources at both the regional and municipal level help you to seek that alignment that I was talking about earlier, and you work towards alignment of the municipal and regional goals and aspirations, and you manage to overcome conflict. So I think those are all characteristics of exceptional boards. Next. That's it. Thank you. Marathon. Any comments, questions, Chair Keller?
No, I just want to say that that's great. I think that was a really good start for us. So yeah, I just wanted to extend the board's thanks to you and let everybody know that there is food. So we'll take a break after that, and hopefully you can join us for something to eat.
Great. Well, thank you to you, and I wish you all well in the next 4 years. And I look forward to watching your success over the time. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Oh yes, we do need to vote on receipt. Thank you. All in favor? And online, are you out there still, Director Hardy?
Yep, still awake.
Okay. We'll be taking a 10-minute recess. Thank you.
Hi there, just checking back in.
Hi, Director Hardy. Yep, we can hear you, and we're just about to begin again. Just gonna check with staff. Are we good? We're good? Okay. Okay, so next we have social media review. And Jennifer Steele, our Manager of Communications and Engagement, is going to provide this. Can I get a first and second for receipt? Kerr Ann Arbor, thank you. And I'll pass it over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Director Hardy, can you hear me okay?
Roger that.
Awesome. Now, Director Hardy, we will send you the PowerPoint. It'll be in the minutes at the end of the presentation and today so that you can look at it. So good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Steele, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Engagement. Today, we will quickly cover the CVRD's approach to communications and engagement, from managing the website and social media accounts to handling media inquiries and developing education and engagement campaigns. The goal is to be the official community source of truth for regional matters. Building trust and providing timely information is very important to the organization's reputation. Some of the key themes that you're going to hear throughout the presentation are: our focus is driven by the priorities of the board and the operational needs. The CVRD uses the IAP2 spectrum for public engagement. The goal is to have the CVRD as a source of truth, especially during emergency situations. And please help us get the message out to the public by following our social media and sharing our channels. Now on to public engagement. So in 2016, the CVRD adopted, the CVRD adopted a public engagement policy. If you're not aware of it, we can send it through so you can see it. The policy provides a formal framework for public engagement. It uses the IAP2 spectrum, which is the International Association of Public Participation, to assist with the planning and execution. The purpose is to welcome residents into the decision-making process early on when opportunities exist. As a rule of thumb, all public engagement must be done with purpose, be organized, and be genuine. In 2020, the CVRD with the Cowichan Valley Regional District, City of Courtenay, and the Regional District of Nanaimo came together as 4 separate local governments to develop a public engagement strategy and toolkit that established a common approach to community engagement efforts and provide tools to staff. The toolkit provides consistency within our public engagements, and I can hand out 2 of the copies so you can see. So you can pass that along once you've kind of skimmed through it. Our main online engagement tool is Connect CVRD. This tool is utilized for larger community engagements where the community dialogue, there's opportunities for two-way communication. It's important to note that social media is not the place for official public engagement. We use social media as an information out tool only. Our objective on social media is to be the source of correct information. And when conversations on our pages go towards providing feedback, we generally get the users to connect in with a staff person leading the project or to connect CVRD. Next slide. Okay, so I know what you guys all want to know is what do you do about those Facebook groups? Sometimes one of our posts, our project sparks a community conversations. Typically, even though we may see one or two posts on our page, these interactions take place in Facebook groups, some of which are public, some of which are private. We're aware of these groups within our region, but we do not actively follow them or belong to them or participate in them. This is a fundamental line that we draw for a number of reasons. First, know that we as a government body most likely are not welcome within these groups. People do not feel freedom to express their opinions if we are there. Second, we don't want to be perceived as having favorites. Commenting in the Union Bay group, but not the Murrayville group. In order to comment in every additional group, which is hundreds or thousands, there's a lot of them, additional resources would be required. Thirdly, typically conversations within these groups are self-corrected by individual members in the community who have the accurate information, and posts by individuals are usually trusted more than organizations stepping in. So what do you do if there's a group who's chattering about one of our projects and spreading incorrect information? Well, this is where our relationship with you comes into play. If you see information that is not accurately being shared, and we're not talking about people's opinions about our projects or their feelings, but truly inaccurate, factual information, here are the things you can do to course correct. You can share it with Russell. We don't need people's names or even the group's names, but we do want to know what false information is out there and determine the best course of action for getting correct information out. You can share correct information from our social media accounts or the website to the group. You can help bring the conversation onto CVRD's official channels or invite those members to our official channels. By establishing these boundaries now, you're really promoting our channels as the official accounts for trusted information. It will not only help within emergency situations, but also build trust regionally. And remember, social media can be a marathon, and if you're going to be on the platforms, you have to be resilient. It can be a toxic place where criticism and negative comments can be a regular occurrence. Before being caught in a web of online commenting, take a moment and really think before responding. In many instances, the best course of action is to just ignore and not engage. This is advice that our legal counsel also agrees with. Please take it seriously as you move forward in your roles online. Next slide. So everyone received a little tip card. Director Hardy, I'll make sure you get one. This spring, we are going to be offering media training to the group. Details will be coming out soon. Here are some important tips if you receive media inquiries or emails from the communications team. For certain press releases, we draft quotes that require your review and thoughts. Typically, the quotes are from the CVRD board chair or the electoral area directors. Our team tries to provide a few days for review, but some instances we require immediate attention for pressing matters. Thank you for circulating these back with your feedback incorporated. If the media contacts you regarding an interview topic, stick to the facts outlined in the staff reports, news releases, and briefing notes. Lastly, give Russell a head up if the media contacts you. That way we can ensure that the coverage is actually accurate. And I look forward to the media training in the spring and doing a deeper dive and preparing for interviews with each of you. Next slide. Okay, so this is our communication priorities for 2023. As you can imagine, communications is really a balancing act between wants and needs. Our team works hard to ensure communication is clear, factual, and accurate on all of our platforms. Our priorities are driven by you. Our goal is to provide communication support on those initiatives that are requiring the largest public interest, investment, communication need, or identified as a board strategic priority. We also invest a lot of time assisting departments operationally with their projects, our tools, and advising them on next steps. Each initiative requires different levels of support, which are identified in the communications planning stage, from strategy development to producing education campaigns and materials and managing social media accounts. Every element takes time, dedication, and resources. Next slide. So for those of you who are not aware of our official communication channels, here they all are. We have Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and our website. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to let me go over what our team does. And hopefully you will follow us on social media and also get your residents to follow us as well. Any questions?
Thanks, Jennifer. Short but sweet. And I am looking forward to the training you mentioned in the spring, so that'll be good, and particularly for our new board members as well. Any questions for Jennifer? Go ahead.
And thanks for that presentation. So with our younger audiences in the Valley, Facebook's a non-starter, Twitter is who knows what's happening. So like Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp, or not WhatsApp, all those things that I don't know yet. My daughter's trying to teach me. So what's our strategy for the emerging social media forums? Because if we only use, let's say, Twitter and Facebook, we are going to miss anyone under a certain age group, which I won't name.
Yeah, so I mean, Instagram and Twitter, there is a demographic here that uses it. It takes a lot of time to create videos and content and get it approved that align with an organization. If you don't have the content and the time, you shouldn't be on the platform. Otherwise, you won't have followers. So unless there's an investment in additional resources to actually do this and to do it right, it doesn't make sense. We have a very large following on Facebook, and we do ads on Instagram, but we don't have an official account where we're constantly having to post to.
Dr.
A big source of information is actually our YouTube channel. It's actually really lively. We have hundreds of videos now. We seem to produce one every 16th hour. So I would draw attention to it because those videos are really well put together. They are often centered our services, and they usually 2-3 minutes and do a great job of explaining the issues. So I would add YouTube, Facebook are still the leading, I think, with Twitter, even though you're right about the young demographic, but there's still a lot of people on those platforms.
Thanks, Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. I totally get the whole thing about not responding during the election. I didn't respond to anything online, but we do have circumstances. We see this across the province where elected officials as well as staff have personal attacks, some really nasty stuff. And we did have a situation this past term with a bit of that. And actually, I know the election is a totally different animal, but during the election, I actually brought to the attention something that had been posted about a staff member, and something had been posted about Director Grieve, and I took the factual information about this allegation that was being made, and I posted it right there. So I guess I feel that there is an obligation to respond to stuff like that. particularly when we see people resigning all over the province because of social media. I understand not responding to, people complaining about, having an opinion or disagreeing with a decision. I'm talking about those things that get a lot more personal, that divulge personal information about people that really can be very harmful. And I'm just wondering if the organization has first of all, I guess, a perspective on that, or any kind of approach or response to those kinds of things. I remember, in my work, my boss would have my back kind of thing. Now we don't, our boss is the public, and yes, the public do step in on our behalf. But yeah, I just was curious about that, because I think we should not be just being bystanders and allowing that behavior. That's just my opinion.
I mean, in the individual Facebook groups, if you see something that's completely, in fact, like not correct information, providing the correct information is exactly what you want to do. And when we did our social media training with the directors last year, we had a session where we went into, it's important you guys have a code of conduct on your Facebook pages, because in that way you can always direct people back to that code of conduct of what's appropriate and what is not. No one should be getting harassed on social media. And if you have that code of conduct, I can even share what we have for the CVRD, and you're more than welcome to copy it for your own. It clearly states, and it gives you the ability to delete things and also advise people back. This is against the code of conduct, and putting it in their place of this isn't appropriate.
It does tend to happen on other pages.
It does.
So,
yeah.
And I mean, those pages do have their rules, and some administrators are pretty good. Others are, it's free speech. So,
yeah. I mean, and the number one thing is definitely let Russell know when you're seeing this, because our team will develop what we think is the best strategy for response.
Absolutely, we'll support you and help you through that. We have for other directors in the past, and we've asked Sue Manhus, who will be providing the legal update, to deal with this particular matter. And he has provided lecture through UBCM in the past. It's available on the UBCM website. He'll be basing his advice to you on that, and helping you to understand sort of when lines are crossed, and you can expect the local government to help out. But the other bad news in terms of sometimes what you have to put up with as well.
Thank you. Director Hillian, go ahead.
Thanks. Jennifer, for the first time in the early fall, I had a separate Facebook account, and which was actually fairly effective. But I really don't know about trying to manage two. I don't know what other people do, but I'm sort of grappling right now with whether to retire that and, just go back to, subjecting my friends all over the place with stuff about local government or, to somehow try and do the extra work involved. And I don't know whether you have any helpful comments along those lines. I'm guessing you're going to advise that we maintain a separate account.
Yes. If you have a separate account, it's a great way to keep your professional and your personal separate. And then the people who you're wanting to be on your professional page, following you on all your updates, that you're getting that audience. Well, whereas your personal, it gets a little bit muggy if you have them both on the same.
Director Moran?
I just wanted to offer to Director Hillian that I do like having the two separate accounts, because you get a lot of friend requests to your personal account that you don't want to friend. But you also don't want to give the appearance, because it's political, for a political reason, that they're trying to friend you. So you don't want to give the impression that you don't care what they have to say. So I have a standard little message I send out to those folks and say, if you're interested in, my political role, this is my page, blah, 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 happy to see you over there or something, and I redirect them to that page.
Yeah.
And then I did a call after partway through the last term, I did a call of anybody on my personal page that was clearly there, mostly because of the political stuff. And I just politely asked them to move to my page, and actually everyone was really good about it.
That's some good advice. Thank you. Any other questions? I was actually wondering about how we might deal with what seems to be starting a trend with the province of moving toward a little bit less public participation, should I say, and in an effort to streamline local government processes, and how we might, I guess, not counter it, but make sure that we aren't losing the really vital information that the public gives us in our services. I guess enshrining public participation and making sure that it is not under attack, and and we, you know, we can't lose that part of what we do as local government. So I'm just wondering, as the communications person, what your take is on that and what's happening.
Yeah. As you know, we have a policy in place in our department. That's what we follow. And we use that public participation framework for right at the beginning when we're in the planning stages. And for projects that don't have the two-way conversation, it is information out only. If the board decides to change how we're doing public engagement and changing the policy of looking at every project individually and figuring out where the public can be involved in the decision-making process, then that's up to the board to make that decision, and we would follow that policy. But at this point, being organized, being genuine, and being consistent is really what we're wanting, and we're wanting the public to be involved.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any lights, so.
Thank you so much, everybody.
And all in favor of receipt? Any opposed?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we're moving on to the next order of business, which is the board code of conduct, item 3. And I'll pass it over to staff. Oh, thank you, Director Arbor and Hillian.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and thank you for delaying this presentation because we know how much Jake likes to talk about policy, and he was unavailable at the last meeting. So Jake's here to present this report and answer your questions with respect to the changes to the code of conduct.
Thank you, Russell, through the chair, and just bear with me for one moment here while I just try and organize all these devices here in front of me. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so this is a great segue into this conversation, and like Russell said, thank you for your indulgence in deferring this to this meeting. I was not available at the last meeting. And Allison has certainly provided a great introduction around the code of conduct, the necessity for it, the changes with regard to legislation, and spoke a little bit about the principles and the content of that policy. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is twofold. We want to introduce and orient you to the policy, and also then propose, as you've likely noted in the report, some fairly substantial additions to the policy with respect to a process for complaints, for investigations, and the consideration of sanctions that the board could levy. I think all of us are likely familiar generally with a code of conduct, but in the context of being employees of organizations large and small, they're quite commonplace. And so it is this new realm of code of conducts that are coming into play for elected officials and elected boards. This is a trend that started across the province, and a number of provinces have ran with it, and most lately the province of BC with their new legislation. In this regard, we've utilized the best practice guidance that's out there that the working group that Allison spoke of has developed. We've also looked at a number of code of conducts from organizations large and small. When I say organizations, I mean local governments. And that's really helped to develop this approach that we're proposing for you tonight. But I will say we've developed what we think is a CVRD specific or a custom approach that we think helps strive to meet the interest of the organization. But again, this is your opportunity tonight to consider those and to question them as you see fit. So before we get into the specifics of our policy, it's worth just talking about the framework for elected officials' conduct. Sort of two broad categories. There's the ethical standards, and then there's the responsible conduct piece. And Allison again has spoke a little bit about both of these, and there is some blurring, in my opinion, between these. Basically, the framework includes the full gamut from expected or societal norms that are developed through culture and otherwise, all the way to laws that are adopted and enacted by the federal and provincial governments that have direct relevance and implication to elected officials here at the local level. If we think about the ethical standards, excuse me, these refer to the legislated or the common law rules of behavior that apply to elected officials and that they must follow. The community charter is probably the most well-known, and that touches on a number of aspects of conduct. It includes conflicts of interest and the exceptions to those conflicts of interest, inside and outside influence, gifts, as Allison spoke of, and as well as the public reporting of contracts that you or someone that's close to you could enter into with the local government. There's other, of course, legislated requirements around the Workers' Compensation Act, which requires employers to provide a safe and healthy workplace. The Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, which requires the protection of personal information that you may encounter as part of your duties. And finally, the criminal code, which is focused on those sort of most egregious activities and behaviors, and in which has application to you as an elected official as well. If we shift our focus to the responsible conduct side, this speaks to your behavior and your conduct with your elected colleagues, with staff, and with the public. And so the two kind of most obvious influences on this are the board code of conduct policy, which we're talking about tonight, the oath of office that you all took at the last meeting, and then the procedure bylaw that also speaks to how you interact at board meetings and how you conduct yourselves as a deliberative body. So this slide speaks to the specifics of the policy, which is in its current form, which was adopted, I think, in 2020 by the board. Allison touched on the kind of somewhat unique nature of our policy, in which right now the typical provincial model or the suggested model includes 4 principles. Ours has 7. It's not to say that you have a higher bar, in my opinion, of conduct, just a different way of framing the issues. I was going to go kind of through each one of these, but I'm cognizant that Allison kind of did touch on a number of these as part of her presentation, as well as some of the general provisions that have outlined there around conduct, conflicts, the policy role of the board, public resources, communication, meeting gifts. So at this point, I'm happy to go through those in a very, very brief summary fashion, or I could simply just pause here and open it up if there's any questions or comments about, again, the principles and the general provisions that are outlined in the policy. And then if there is none, then we can move on to the proposal around the process.
Okay, are there any questions? Director Hardy?
Just personal relationships, I guess. Is that getting delved in here, or is that being delved into later on in the presentation?
In what regard, I guess, would your interest or question be around personal relationships?
For example, if I have a personal relationship with Ken Grant or Director Grant, and he's the chair of the board, how that would work in regards to voting for different things that we need to vote on for agenda items.
Yeah, I mean, through the chair, I think there's certainly the principles speak to the ways in which elected officials should be operating, and there's nothing prohibiting somebody from receiving information or influence around those individuals that are within your family or within your friends or otherwise. The hard and fast of the rules provide that conflicts of interest, of course, of those that are of a pecuniary nature, or those that would bias you in your decision when there's some benefit that could arise to you or to the individuals that you're connected to. And in this regard, I mean, I think with the example provided Again, if there's a personal relationship there, if that's providing you information that as part of your overall gathering of information on a particular decision, that wouldn't necessarily rule that as being offside or otherwise.
What if it comes to a vote on something?
Yeah, so if it's a vote on an issue, again, it really all depends on the issue that's before the board, and again, whether there's if you feel like you have questions about whether the nature of your relationship and how it's influencing, that's where it probably a conversation with staff, and we can, some of these conversations may lead to legal advice depending on the nature of them, but certainly if there's a relationship or uncertainty there, I'd encourage any director to reach out to staff in advance of the meeting just to have that conversation and talk that through.
Any further questions? Director Hilliard.
Thanks. I've had experience at tables where there either wasn't much of a code of conduct or it wasn't very well used, and I think that it's difficult to catch things as they happen. If it's conduct that takes place within an actual board meeting, how do you address that as opposed to something that happens apart from the board table? I think there is some onus on whomever perceives that there is a violation to present some sort of justification for that. And maybe that's what you're going to speak about in terms of what the recourse is. If somebody actually thinks there is a violation of the code of conduct, that might be more helpful to flesh out some of these potential examples.
Yeah, through the chair, certainly the next part of this presentation will hopefully get to the heart of that, as far as if there's a perceived breach of the policy, what's the steps that can be taken and what can be expected from all the parties involved.
Okay, go ahead. Thanks.
Great. So yeah, moving into this next phase, essentially, as I mentioned, the proposal before the board reflects a full process in which would be articulated in the policy around how complaints are handled, how they're submitted, how they're investigated, and then what the board's process would be to determine if there's any sanctions that would be made against a member or members. I noted at the top that we had reviewed a number of examples from other local governments, and one of the kind of key issues in which we grappled with was who handles this process? How is this handled? This process handled? Is it completely by a third party, neutral individual or party throughout the entirety of it, or is there involvement of senior staff and the chair perhaps at different points? What we've tried to strive for here is an approach that hopefully strikes that balance of creating that neutral party where it's key, but also undertaking best efforts at the initial stages of complaints to resolve them informally and utilizing the resources that we have through the senior staff and the board chair. So hopefully you'll see that reflected in this approach, but I'll go through kind of each one of the different aspects of it. The other thing to note here at the top is that we are recommending an approach that has been developed by the city and Nanaimo, in which they have identified an opportunity to appoint a commissioner, and that the term commissioner, they use that for essentially the investigator that would handle these complaints. Or if one is not identified or appointed by the board, then the CAO has the ability to hire an individual to perform that function. And this kind of allows both opportunities, depending on if the board wants to have a consistent individual or firm undertaking this work, or whether there's a bit more of a flexibility there and confidence that an individual with the right skills and experience can be of course acquired and contracted to support investigations as necessary. So the first part of this procedure is really, of course, as it notes here, the informal complaint procedure. It is one in which, as you note, there's really just 2 points to it. It's addressing the individual that is perceived to have broken the policy, to ask that cease, that activity, or that behavior stop, or it's requesting assistance from the CAO and the chair to seek resolution. So under this, and this may be a given here, but under this approach, you're not looking for, again, there's not going to be sanctions issued at the end of the process. This is really just to seek the stopping of that activity and to request assistance if need be from the chair and CAO to support that. So very much informal, but an important step in which it is recommended that that be the first step in any perceived breach of the policy.
Director Morning.
Thank you. What if it's the chair that you are having the issue with? Because our current chair is very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, the policy speaks to in the case of it also could be the chair or the vice chair that could be involved. So they're able to spell each other off in the case of if the complaint is about the chair, then the vice chair would be acting in the role that,
right.
that the chair would.
So just one more wrinkle. There have been situations recently actually where somebody felt very singled out and there was a contravention, but they were outnumbered. And Allison's presentation talked about how we all are equal members, but we know that there are power imbalances regardless of what's supposed to be, and people often don't feel like they are in a position of power to self-advocate, or if they're outnumbered on the board. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I think this is an important issue to draw a distinction to, in which certainly there is the potential there that an individual is not in the majority or is not supported potentially in some regard by members of the board in their complaint. And this is where the neutral third party's involvement is key, because as you'll note here from this process, the CAO and the chair are going to be seeking resolution to that issue in the initial stages. But if resolution is not achieved, that is when automatically, not by option, but automatically the third party investigator is involved to look at the complaint, look at the response, and then determine whether they need to do a formal investigation. So it's out of the hands then of potentially somebody who could be biased in that regard.
Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if there's been any consideration giving to using restorative justice. Our local Community Restorative Justice Society does a lot of mediation on behalf. My understanding is they've done mediation on behalf of the regional district when it comes to fence fights and stuff like that between neighbors. So are we prepared to use restorative justice at this table and take advantage of the expertise that exists in the valley?
Yeah, through the chair, there's nothing preventing the board from considering an alternative approach. The sanctions that are noted at the end of the policy, those are there as examples. They're not an exhaustive list from which the board can only choose from that list. So in my view, there's flexibility for the board to consider alternative approaches should that be an interest of yours.
Director Harbour.
Yeah, thanks. In regards to to the third party, that was the only thing that I noticed in the policy that maybe and it's not just the chair, but it's the chair and CEO. What if there's a problem? Because we saw at Thompson Okanagan, right, where they had the problem with both the chair and CEO were in cahoots. And basically, lavishly garnishing their lifestyles. I don't see that happening, but the policy, if we're introducing a policy, I think there has to be faith and exploration of all the scenarios. So one suggestion I had, the current policy says that the CAO appoints the commissioner if we needed a commissioner. So my suggestion is maybe at the start of each term or whatnot, the board could have a selection of like 3 potential commissioners that are put on retainer. And then, the board has had some say on who that commissioner is. So the CAO is not appointing somebody who could also be lavishing me, so that was the only part of the policy that I thought there was a workaround to ensure that everybody's covered, because I felt a lot of it was directing the ball back in the CAO's court in regards to handling complaints. So I just was looking for a trip mechanism to ensure that there's no problems there, as we saw in that other regional district.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just suggest that, yeah, this is part of the feedback that we were hoping to get tonight, is whether the board had an interest in making an appointment as of a commissioner that would again be that consistent body or individual. The one challenge to that is that when we lock in with one individual, we're then subject, of course, somewhat to their schedule and availability. We have put some fairly tight timelines here as far as the formal investigation that it needs to be completed within 30 days. So that's a little bit of my own hesitation. It's just that if we were to call up an individual, they may be booked with other local governments conducting investigations, and it somewhat limits us then to try and secure that. But in your suggestion, I think you noted maybe 3 different options there. So yeah, that's certainly, this is the type of feedback we're hoping to get tonight, is if the board has an interest in that regard.
Dr. Hillian, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I did want to clarify that a bit further, because my read of the code of conduct, and I don't know if it was exactly spelled out, but what was the commissioner that was appointed would be a contract position that was specific to each time one of these situations arose. Did I read that wrong? Or because what we're talking about now sounds like a longer term appointment of such?
Thank you for that question, through the chair. Yeah, the proposal before you is that you're essentially just engaging that commissioner when needed, when triggered by a complaint under this process, or whether the board has an interest in some training around a matter. That would be another opportunity in which we can draw on this individual, but it would not be an ongoing retainer in which somebody is consistently engaged with us, regardless of whether we have complaints in the hopper or not.
So there's only so many people who do this type of work, and I wonder if it's possible to, towards the beginning of the term, get some sense of who these people are. Like, what's the pool that you have to choose from, so that we have some sense of who's out there doing this type of work, who might be retained. And it's possible that you would go with different people depending on their expertise in relation to the nature of the complaint. It's also possible that Director Graves' suggestion of restorative justice might be appropriate in a particular instance, or otherwise. So, but it would be useful to, following Director Arbor's suggestion, to have some sense of who's actually out there doing this work that we would draw from.
Through the chair, if I can just state that, I think the pool is larger than we may think. There's certainly lots of law firms that specialize in workplace investigations out there, and so while it's probably not in the thousands, but there's definitely a fair number of firms operating in this realm.
Are we primarily talking law firms, though?
Firms that specialize in workplace investigations. That's probably the key skill set there. From our review, certainly, given the strong requirement for procedural fairness in all these processes, having a legal background, I think, is valuable, but not necessarily critical.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I don't see any further questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I was in the start of this slide. So if the board will just indulge, I'll just keep going here a little bit with the process, just to make sure, again, maybe it might trigger more questions or comments. So if we look at that formal complaint procedure process, it is initiated with a written complaint to the CAO. The CAO is then seeking a response from the respondent, in which then the chair and the CAO can review that, meet with the two parties, and try and seek, again, informal resolution. This is a point in which it does, like I said before, differ significantly from other local governments or many of the others, in which they're turning over that entire process to the third-party investigator. And we see this as yet another junction point in which we can hopefully try and resolve this conflict without expending resources, and quickly, and to the benefit of all parties. If resolution is not achieved, again, then the third-party investigator is performing the preliminary assessment, in which they're determining whether the complaint warrants then a formal investigation. Should that formal investigation be warranted, they again have 30 days in which to undertake that and provide a report to the board on that. The board receives that report, and you determine if any measures, if contravention is found, should be applied. There's a number of factors, prescribed factors, that we've identified in the policy that you should consider in making that determination around what type of sanction could be imposed. And again, it is a list there as an example that this is an evolving nature of law in which some local governments have included direct reference to a docking of pay at 15 or 25%, depending on the number of contraventions that have occurred. We've not identified that, but again, it's not to say that it's not available to the board should that be an approach you wish to take. Of course, all of this is something that hopefully we don't have to go down the road of, but I think as Allison has outlined, certainly misconduct can have a direct impact on this board's ability to properly function. And so should there be issues, this is hopefully a way to resolve those as quickly and as effectively as we can. So that's kind of the three key steps that we're proposing here that would result in concluding the process. A couple other things to note is with the complaint and investigation process, we've talked a little bit about that already. We have included as under the second bullet here a bit of a pause in the process around the election period, just to eliminate any opportunity for a complaint to come forward that may be tied to the election or the candidacy of somebody. We've also included some really strong language as far as transparency in this process. And one of the key things to bring to your attention is that report, while it certainly could contain some very sensitive information and be very contentious in some regards, we are suggesting with this policy that report would be received in an open session of the board and that you would deliberate on that report and make your decision regarding any sanctions in an open session. That doesn't mean that you couldn't go in camera to receive legal advice for other valid reasons as part of, prior to or as part of that process. But ultimately, this would be a public decision made with the report being publicly available as well. And lastly, the point here is just the reimbursement of legal costs. While some could look at this process and say, well, there's no real teeth to this because some of the potential outcomes could be a request for training or a letter of reprimand or a request for an apology being issued in the paper. I think as elected officials, the repercussions can be quite significant, even if some may perceive them not to be. So it's I think prudent that you have the availability to get legal advice and assistance in this process should you find yourself as a complaint being lodged against some activity or behavior that's on your behalf. So we have included a clause in there regarding the reimbursement of legal costs, but it is again the board's decision to do that. And there's some factors there in which would suggest to the board that you shouldn't reimburse costs if certain really egregious behaviors or activities have occurred. But I think that generally summarizes the proposal, and happy to take any other further questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, I see Director Moore has her light on.
Thanks. I mean, this is something that I've been interested in a while, is taking a look at this, so I have more questions. So is the election period open season then, in terms of things are not going to be investigated? I guess I'm being, goofy about it, but I think that if you're a sitting board member, you should still be under the existing code of conduct. And just because there's an election doesn't mean that you get to, throw that out the window. So I'm just curious. This did come up during the last election somewhat. And I was, told that you do have to have it. Definitely, you can have specific language that, that kind of covers that. But I was surprised to hear that there was this election period where it was kind of, open season. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So the period itself is identified as being in August 1st of a general election year. And basically a complaint could still be lodged, but it would essentially be held in abeyance until the new board is sworn in. And if that individual that responded to that complaint is reelected, then that process is resumed at that point. It's only if they're not elected or they don't seek reelection that then there's really not much point to trying to go down that road.
So there could be recourse if the two people were reelected.
Precisely.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Director McCollum.
Yeah, just a little clarification about how the reimbursement of legal costs would function, and where the board's role is in terms of determining whether or not that's a reasonable situation. thinking of an example where there's been kind of a series of events leading up to, a particular circumstance in which legal costs are required. I assume for reimbursement, the director would be submitting those after the process had completed and there would be a result. And is that the point at which the board would determine if that's a reasonable thing to reimburse? I'm just thinking if they were, deemed to not be at fault, or they had gone through other steps to, remedy the situation versus, ongoing issues. Like, is that kind of how that would fall out?
Yeah, part of this will be seeing how this process unfolds, certainly, and that certainly, I think, is the scenario that I had contemplated with this, that post-process a request for reimbursement would occur, but I don't think the policy prohibits essentially midway through the process a request coming forward, but it does speak to the specifics in which the board may provide that reimbursement, in which the commissioner ultimately does not determine that the board member acted with dishonesty, gross negligence, or malicious or willful misconduct. It's the board member's first complaint process within a given 4-year term. So there is instances in which we can envision multiple complaints coming forward, and whether then the board should be reimbursing those fees for an individual. And then finally, it's just that ceiling on the limit, which is $10,000. So yeah, hopefully I'm answering your question here, but I had contemplated the same process in which post investigation, the request could come forward, and then the board within these kind of guidelines has the ability to grant that reimbursement or not, which we think is appropriate given that it could be a fairly high expenditure of resources.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I just wanted to make sure I understood that the same way. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Cole-Hamilton, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just looking at the remedies or the I guess remedies following, and one of them is 34E is a recommendation to attend training. The other ones are all pretty prescriptive, but a recommendation. I'm just wondering, would the elected official be free to refuse that recommendation, or could it be required before they reattend the board?
Yeah, broadly, the courts have said that the councils and boards have the ability to, enforce their code of conducts on members, but whether you can, compel a member then to take training, and if the member doesn't take training, then what would be the implications of that? Yeah, this list is intended not to limit the board, and so one of the factors that's described in here is that the commissioner, while not required to provide recommendations around a sanction, the individual could make comment on that and suggest, given the nature of the issue, a training would be an appropriate remedy of this. And so I think at that point it'd be worth the board, gaining legal advice around the ability to compel or just to recommend training in that regard. And at this point, I don't feel like I have the knowledge to definitively say that a requirement to attend training, if not upheld, what the implications could be or what the board's steps could be from there on.
If I just follow, so I mean, it says that the board may impose sanctions, including the following. So the fact that it says recommendation would not preclude the board from say requiring someone to attend anger management training before they return to the board, and we would perhaps seek legal advice on that. But the fact that we're not constrained by those suggestions in that section.
Precisely, yeah, that's certainly my interpretation of this and proposal. Yeah.
Oh, Director McCollum, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this process and how the most likely scenario that we would see this is either kind of aggressive or just toxic behavior interpersonally. And then the other common thing is that you hear around local governments is issues around keeping in-camera information in camera. And so these are kind of the two scenarios that I'm thinking of as I'm reading this. And were someone to be investigated and found to have shared in-camera information, and looking at this, possible list of sanctions. I see one of them is restricting how documents are provided to a member. But say, say we have the unfortunate situation of someone that's shared in-camera information on multiple occasions. Would the board have the ability to prevent them from receiving in-camera information if they're still a board member? Like, at what point do we not have control over those pieces simply by, who's been elected?
Yeah, through the chair, it's so the ceiling on this is certainly the ability, the board's legal authority to enact sanctions against them. But in this case, of sharing confidential information, that may be something in which we would make an application to the courts for then the courts to render a decision on either disqualification or some other impact, depending on the nature of the disclosure that took place. So it's one of those things where probably we have language in our policy that speaks to the sharing of confidential information, but also the community charter, which has some serious ramifications, also may speak to that detail. And so through this process, that's where the commissioner and their expertise and guidance can hopefully help us say, this is actually better dealt with through another process, such as an application to the court because of the nature of the disclosure. So yeah, hopefully that helps to answer that. But yeah, it all depends on the details. I think is really where we'll see where this process goes and how it unfolds.
Agreed. Yeah, thanks for that clarification.
Okay, I'll check in online again. Director Hardy, are there any further questions?
Nope, I'm good.
Director Healy.
Yeah, thanks. I read this on the weekend, so I maybe don't remember all the points, but kind of following up on the last question that was asked about the remedies. Where does it specify what happens if the person doesn't follow through with anything that they've been that's been imposed as a sanction?
So that the policy doesn't speak to that that scenario in which somebody doesn't adhere to or doesn't follow it. I guess in theory, it could be grounds for another complaint that could come forward, and then a process to consider that under the policy. But yeah, it doesn't speak to that type of scenario.
Yeah, and maybe I should clarify that I'm hearkening back to my former career as a probation officer, where basically courts imposed sanctions, and part of my job was to monitor whether people actually carried them out or not. So there's a number of remedies in here that you can only imagine the sort of egregious behavior that it would take to restrict people from attending a regional district facility. But I'm just wondering if we need something in there that actually specifies that if somebody does not follow through with the remedies or sanctions imposed, that is in fact grounds for further sanctions that the board could in fact impose.
Yeah, it's I can't say that I've contemplated that type of behavior where somebody then doesn't follow through on what the board had done, and it's something that certainly we can consider as this is our first real kind of inclusion of these type of clauses in here, and certainly that'd be an interesting conversation to have with Superman Haas as part of this. Certainly, while it's unfortunate that these types of examples come forward, but they are more and more common, and with the inclusion of more and more local governments having codes of conduct, they're quickly through the courts exploring the full realm and authorities that they've got. So yeah, I think as I've noted here on this slide, there's a few upcoming opportunities in which I think the board could have further kind of discussion on this matter. And I think that would be a good opportunity to see if maybe a tweak to this policy to include that would be warranted or beneficial, or if not. But at this point in time, yeah, it's hard for me to say what kind of language we would include, which could have teeth, in which then, even if they didn't follow through, then again, are we just refiring up this process again and again and again?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you adopt these types of codes, you hope you're never going to have to use them.
Right.
But you do have to envision all possible scenarios as the remedies appear to do, with that one possible exception.
Dr. Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. I was just looking at section 9, which talks about the kinds of behavior which could be dealt with here. And it under subsection 1, it says, and CVRD policies contravenes the law, ... and CVRD policies. Perhaps if we just inserted something back in the remedies section saying that any refusal to follow through on the prescribed penalty would be viewed as a contravention of this policy, then that would automatically feed it right back into this section.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And in my view, simply having the connection already in the policy gives us at least a toe into that opportunity. So it could for clarity or for could certainly be added, but at least it gives that connection there.
I would say there's definitely there's a connection there, but we'd only be doing this in a situation where we're dealing with an extremely oppositional person who might well question the vagueness of the language. And the other thing is, because we drafted this, any ambiguities would be interpreted against our interests and in favor of the other party's interests. It's just a principle of interpretation. So if just a little bit of clarification would fix that.
Thank you.
And Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You may correct me on this, but I seem to remember from my term on UBCM that when this was brought up, that a duly elected official is a duly elected official, regardless of his views or his mannerisms, unless he's contravening the criminal code, hate speech and what have you, he's still a duly elected official. And there's been situations where that person has been reelected from the same seat. So, I mean, we may fancy ourselves as, being the arbiters in this and being able to dole out, some kind of punishment if it is not followed and all that kind of stuff. But I think if we end up in court, correct me if I'm wrong, but that person is still legally representing his constituent.
Yeah, through the chair, one of the core tenets of this is that any sanction that the board may remedy can't prevent you from fulfilling your duty as an elected official. So that's certainly the ceiling on this. While we can restrict access to facilities, we can request training, we could potentially dock pay, but we can't prevent somebody from fulfilling their elected duty that they've been elected to office for.
It's democracy.
Okay, any further questions?
Madam Chair, if I may, just one of the elements I haven't mentioned here, but this policy would apply then, like many of our corporate policies, to the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board. So we are suggesting that should you be supportive of it, we take it to that board, gather any feedback, and then it come back to this board. And if the board is interested in adding a further clause respecting, an instance in which an elected official may not follow the remedy or the sanction that's imposed, that could be an opportunity in which we come back to you with that proposal, should that be an interest of the board.
So you don't necessarily want that today, but you'll take it to the Waste Management Board, see if that's also something that they're interested in there, and then bring it back?
Yeah, I guess I just see the opportunity in which we're going to be coming back to the board, hopefully to seek your formal endorsement of this. And with the feedback that we've had tonight, we could make a few slight amendments to this proposal for you, and then come back at that time to seek that endorsement.
Dr. Moran.
Thank you. So, just thinking about what Director Grieve said in the past, we've seen people who have been criminally convicted of something still sitting on their seat. Like, that's where a lot of this has come from, for pretty horrendous things. And of course, the province now has put in measures so that that person can be removed. But I think they have to be, serious, whatever that definition is, I'm not sure. So really, does this is there any way for someone to be removed other than those provincial, those new, measures that have been put in?
Through the chair. So like you said, the province has recently brought forward changes so that if there's a criminal charges laid against an elected official, you're, I think, essentially required to vacate your seat while that charge is being pursued in the courts. And then should you be found guilty, then you'd be disqualified. There's a number of other clauses which may disqualify an elected official. Those are touched on in the community charter mainly, and therefore, again, conflicts of interest, breach of trust,
Right.
Those types of really serious, egregious type of activities. But beyond that, no, it's only those most serious requirements, if breached, that would result in a disqualification.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any further lights. That's the end of your presentation?
That's it.
All right, I think we need to clap then. Okay, thanks. So we are on receipt. All in favor of receipt? Any opposed? And that's that the proposed amendment to the Board of Conduct policy to include the revisions concerning complaints and enforcement as per the staff report be approved in principle and referred to the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board. Any further discussion? Dr. Arbor.
Yeah, I have a question, partly because just coincidentally, it's the next item on the agenda, but we tend to refer our policies to the Waste Management Board, but we don't refer them to the 911, even though that's under our authority. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, it's a separate corporation adopts its own policies, and it's not subject to the CVRD policy.
Thank you. And Director McCollum.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that the recommendation as it's worded still works with what we were just discussing in terms of a revision coming back.
The approval in principle.
Yeah, the approval in principle certainly works, but if the board were to pass a subsequent resolution just to direct the inclusion of a clause for not following a sanction or remedy directed by the board, then we can take that and incorporate that in to come back to you after the CSW on board meeting.
Okay, so we'll vote on this and then go to that. All in favor of the recommendation on the floor? Any opposed? And checking in online, Director Hardy?
I'm good.
Is that in the affirmative?
Yeah.
So, okay, thanks. Okay, so that's unanimous. And so we'll open the floor to the further motion.
I'll move the motion as Jake suggested. I'm not going to try and reword that again.
Okay. And did I hear a second? Cole Hamilton. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Moving on, we have item 4, which is the appointment to North Island 911 Board of Directors. Arbor and Cole Hamilton, thank you. And I'll pass it to staff.
This was referred from your last meeting. A suggestion was made that Director Swift, who was the past representative for the Comox Valley Regional District, might also be appointed this time. I understand from Director Grant, who spoke with her, that she's not interested in running as the member at this time. So we look to the board to appoint your new member as well as the alternate.
Okay, Director Arbor.
Thanks. I'd like to nominate Dr. Grant and maybe alternate Dr. Grieve if you're interested. I think both of them expressed interest, one by email and one a little bit last meeting. So.
Okay, Director Grant.
Yeah, so anybody else want to do this? I'm taking one for the team here. But in saying that, I did speak with Maureen and she would be happy to be the alternate, if that's okay with the board, because she's got all the knowledge from before, so it would make
I respectfully decline.
And I just got an email from her saying she was in, so there you go.
Okay, thank you for that. Oh, Director Hillian.
I just wonder if Director Grant knows there's a meeting on Friday.
I got the agenda sent to me from alternate Director Swift, who's getting them.
Okay, so we're still on receipt. So all in favor of receipt? Any opposed? That's carried. And the recommendation is that we appoint Director Grant as member and alternate member as Director Swift, or alternate Director Swift. Alternate. Okay. Hillian and Grieve, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, not to scare Director Grant, but there is an election for president of the corporation on Friday as well.
I'd like to nominate Ken Grant.
Yeah, we're gonna build a wall.
Okay, so we're on to bylaws and resolutions. We have one for adoption. It's bylaw 736, revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw. Moved by Grant, seconded by McCollum. And it's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. And we will go in camera.